budget matters. We're joined now by Mr. Adetunji Ogunyemi, who is an economic historian and lecturer at the Obafemi Awolowo University. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you so much.
Well, this argument just keeps going here and there about it. And had it always been like this, by the way, whenever budgets come up, this argument precedes the eventual passage and implementation is a different chapter?
Exactly. It's always been a common refrain in the financial administration of Nigeria for budgets to pass through these periods of crisis, particularly between the legislature and the executive. The executive always insists that it has the final, unequivocal, total, absolute power over the budget. But this is not true. The Constitution of the Federal Republic, Section 80 particularly, empowers the National Assembly to prescribe the manner by which the budget shall have to be heard, especially expenditure matters.
Now you're talking about, you said manner, you use the word manner. It means, could you expatiate more on that? Is it the same thing as changing what the executive has written or proposed?
Beautiful. Actually, it actually means principle. It means that the legislature has the power to set the minimum and the maximum expenditure limits. So it is not true, and it is absolutely unconstitutional for the executive to insist that the National Assembly has no power to set the maximum expenditure limit. It also means that the National Assembly has the power to tinker with the parameters setting the budget calculations. And one of the parameters is the benchmark. For example, in 2004, the National Assembly insisted that the parameters in the benchmark for the crude oil export shall be $25. The president then, President Olusegun Obasanjo, insisted it should be $23 per barrel. Don't forget, in that very year, the National Assembly passed a budget of 1.3 trillion naira, whereas the president submitted a budget of 1.089 trillion naira. So there was a disparity, therefore, between the legislative budget and the executive budget. And it dragged on for 6 months. This country never had a budget for 6 months. And it was extremely, very disruptive of the capital budget implementation profile.
But remember, there was also a role that there was a time they were arguing about what they refer to as constituency projects, the right to include it in that or not. Did that also play a role in all of this?
Of course, it's part of the politicking. We should not forget that the budget document is not only an economic statement, it is also law. And that is why it is technically called the Appropriation Act. And if it is Appropriation Act, it means it has to pass through the legal processes of passage, the first, the second, the third reading. But in between these, there is also the politics of budget. The budget encapsulates what the executive intends to implement. It's actually a reflection of the manifesto of the ruling elite. And whereas the National Assembly too has its own politics too, the National Assembly must be relevant to its constituency, and the National Assembly must also be relevant to the Nigerian public opinion. And therefore, when the need arises, the National Assembly sets the agenda by insisting, we too here have a duty to our constituency. We may not be in the executive, yes, but we are also in the grassroots. And where the politics are in this country is the grassroots.
Let's look at the reason, why this has come up again. The executive has set the $72 per barrel benchmark.
75.
And they base their setting on the planning,
yes,
findings, history, and of course the price of crude oil in the market. Is subject to fluctuation, and they always try to look for a safe price to peg it out so that whatever happens in the international market, we're at least home safe and dry as far as funding of our budget is concerned. It would seem that the legislative arm of government doesn't seem to recognize or reckon with this fact.
Oh, that's true.
Do you see it like that?
Part of the crisis and the conflict of interest in the passage or generally in the budgetary process. And it explains further, if not consolidates, the trilogy of the budget, being politics, being economics, and being law at the same time. Now, the executive will want to convince us that its own benchmark, $72, for example, is better than the National Assembly's benchmark. But by what authority is the executive setting this? Even the statistics that are available to the executive are questionable. For example, we do not actually know the exact amount of oil we pump in this country. That is the truth. The CBN governor just attested to that. We are not absolutely sure how much oil we pump. And even if we are sure of what the benchmark or generally the international market price for oil is, are we also sure of the disparity between what actually the oil price is and what the executive wants to give to us? For example, why do we have to explain, or what do we have to save $10 or get a margin of just $10 between the actual and the executive proposal, and at the same time want to spend that through the excess crude oil account? I mean, why do you, if you are selling the oil at $82 per barrel, and you want to say $72 per barrel should be the benchmark, and the National Assembly say, no, we think that it should be $75 per barrel. I don't think there's any crisis in that, except that the executive just wants to insist on his way. The National Assembly has a superior authority over the budget, I insist, because our law says so.
And Chamberlain, yes. Sorry to butt in here. Chamberlain asked you, because he wanted you to go into time, since you're an economic historian, he wanted you to tell us if truly this is the first time we've seen something like this. Well, your PhD thesis titled Federal Budgets in Nigeria, A History of the Processes, Policies and Problems, which was also adjudged by the NUC as the best PhD thesis in the discipline of arts. Could you tell us what you saw that made it stand out from all other researches people have done?
My work was actually on the budget of Nigeria between 1954 and 1999. That's about a period of about 50 years. And don't forget, Nigeria became a federal state in 1954, legally. We have been practicing regions since 1946. But we were not a federal state, truly speaking, until 1954. So the budgetary processes of Nigeria as a federal state should actually begin from 1954. And so in between these periods, we were able to discover from that work that the issue of budget and budgeting became an issue, a strong issue of conflict between the legislature and the executive only, say, around 1980, during the time of the President Shehu Shagari. Don't forget, in 1981, the Bender State of Nigeria then, we had 19 states then, which was led by Professor Ambrose Folorun Shoali, as at that time, had to sue the federal government to court on the issue of revenue allocation, and insisting that the revenue allocated to Bender State was by far too small, considering its contribution to the national revenue pool. And that was where we started the crisis of budgeting. So, the Bender State government won, yes, and the law had to be rewritten. But from that time, the military came in, and budget became a decree, a diktat. This is what we are going to have, and nobody is going to tell us what we are going to spend. But it never worked, because budget must just connect to the people. If there is a disconnect between what the government wants to do and what the people expect them to do, then there is going to be a development crisis. So development started chasing politics in Nigeria rather than the reverse, you see. And then in the time of President Obasanjo, of course, we had the largest, longest, deepest budget crisis in this country. There was not a single year, save for 2007 and the year 1999. That is the remainder of 1999, immediately the president took over, that the National Assembly ever agreed with the executive. They disagreed on every point, whether benchmark
were they
or the total
because
size.
they just wanted to do it or frustrate the executive, or were they always on point when they raise up any kind of objections towards
There is
that?
this missionary attitude of the executive, a missionary attitude on the financial administration of Nigeria, which was actually borrowed from the military orientation. That attitude is, this is what we have, and we are going to spend it this way. We are not going to listen to any advice whatsoever. But the National Assembly exists to give advice. It also exists to check. It also exists to oversee what the executive does. That opportunity might not have been possible under the military rule, but then the Nigerian public opinion was there, you know, and the civil service technocrats was also there.